Tony Catanzara, a graduate of New York City's famous High School of Performing Arts. Tony danced with the Tokyo production of West Side Story and was a soloist with the Norman Walker Company. And Pamela Latimer. Pamela was a classmate of Tony's at the High School of Performing Arts. She, too, is currently a member of the Norman Walker Company. Camera 3 today will illustrate the fact that the American dancer can no longer be a narrow specialist, but must be ready to adapt his skill in any way, in any style, in any technique that the choreographer may demand. Our guide on, as we examine the life of the dancer, is an old friend of Camera 3's. He's the Dean of America's Dance Critic, Walter Terry of the New York Herald Tribune. Mr. Terry is a dance historian. He is the author of innumerable articles and of several books, the latest of which, Walter, is Adora Duncan, Her Life, Her Art, Her Legacy, if I have the
That's right.
Title correctly. Well, it's a pleasure, as always, to welcome you back to
Well, it's wonderful to be here.
And we're calling this program Today's Dancer.
That's right, yes.
Now, does this imply that today's dancer is up against a situation that didn't exist for yesterday's dancer?
Oh, I would think so, very much. Yesterday's dancer, you used the term narrow specialist, in many cases could specialize in ballet, could specialize in Spanish, specialize in some idiom of theatrical dancing. But today, for the commercial theater on Broadway or around the world, London, Paris, name it, today's dancer must be prepared to move into any area of dance that the choreographer demands or that the theme of the show invites. And the commercial theater isn't as bad as that word commercial leads you to believe. Well, he must be a ballet dancer. It's essential to have this basic training. He must have modern dance for body fluidity, naturally jazz, which is our folk dance of today, or it might be, as in the case of, well, let's say Jerome Robbins, The King and I, he might have to do Siamese dancing, or in an Agnes de Mille one, Americano, you know, a long ways, or tap. You can't tell. Today's dancer has to be.
Suppose a dancer is trained in ballet, leaving commercial theater out of it, and stays with a ballet company through a season.
Yes.
Does ballet itself go beyond the classic confines?
Oh, of course it does. The times have changed from the old days of the classical dance where the steps were primarily the same and you just change costume. Now you have to change idiom. For example, in the New York City Ballet, a dancer like Edward Villella is a great classicist, but here in this scene from Western Symphony, he's doing what's called a split jump. And it's a combination of ballet and Americana, with the exuberance of American youth in it. Then, of course, the romantic ballet continues. Here, for example, are our two stars, Rochelle Zide and Michael Mall, in a romantic lift from Thomas Andrews' dramatic ballet, Clarissa. But versatility, of course, doesn't even stop there. Here, for example, is that wonderful artist Vera Zorina, who used to be a ballerina with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo and other companies. Broadway star, movie star. And now here she is in Stravinsky's Persephone, in which she not only danced and was supported in classical ballet terms, but also had to speak as an actress, and on top of all that, in French. And she was marvelous in it. But even then, that doesn't represent all the versatility of today's dancer. Here's Nora Kay, and I think our Michael Mall in a scene from Jerome Robbins' The Cage. Do you remember the theme of that? It was that this creature, part insect, part human, was out to destroy the male, and Miss Kay went at it with a vengeance. And I remember opening night seeing some of the husbands kind of withdraw from their wives and look a little bit doubtful about them as they left the theater.
Who became very cheerful, of course.
Right. And then, of course, here's a scene from George Balanchine's Agon. Now, there is ballet movement there, but it's nothing like ballet of the last century or the early part of this, because Stravinsky's music invites a totally different kind of action from what, say, Tchaikovsky would have done.
And yet nobody was more rigidly schooled in classical ballet than Balanchine.
Yes. But you see, he too represents today's dancer, as Arthur Mitchell and Diane Adams do in that. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, our theater without jazz would be unthinkable, because it can be translated from ordinary ballroom or high school fun to the theater, as it was in Jerome Robbins' marvelous ballet called New York Export Opus Jazz, which is shown right here. Ballet's in it, but jazz is there.
Well, now, I'd like to to talk to Rochelle Zeid and Michael Moll, who are with us today, and we've already seen them.
And see whether
and
they
see
agree
whether they agree with that.
Me. Well, of course,
in terms of their own careers.
They're today's dancers, so they're the ones to speak. Mike and Chellie, could you come and, before you show your versatility as
and
speaker.
welcome to Camera 3.
Hello.
Would you sit down?
Thank you.
Thank you. With pleasure.
I'm quite sure the answer will be yes, Rochelle, but in what way has this expanding demand upon the dancer as artist been reflected in your career?
Well, when I started out in Ballet Russe, I spent half of my time as a swan and half of my time as a rather naughty can-can girl. And I thought my life would go along that way for a while. But my first major role in the company turned out to be that of a Mexican señorita in sombreros. And from there, as I got older, because nowadays particularly, the older you get, the more dramatic you're allowed to become, I began to take on more dramatic things. And I've done Clarissa, which is mid-Victorian England, and the Still Point, which is very contemporary, Anxiety.
Ms.
I haven't got...
Hollander, which we once did on Camera 3.
I haven't got back to that swan yet. I'm still looking for her.
Well, but you started out with the swan,
Yes.
which is good. How about you, Michael?
Well, I've been working on a project for about 2 years now, which is to do with the versatility of a dancer, and it's very similar in context to this program we're doing today. It's called To Go Dancing, TWO, and Mr. Walter Terry has written a marvelous script for me, and I have a young ballerina, Colleen Corcray, as my partner, and an actress, Joan Watson, as the narrator. And it runs a gamut from the old soft shoe to classical ballet. It has some modern, and it actually has some of those stretches in there too.
You're giving yourself quite a challenge.
Yes.
When this is a dance review in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, well, some people want to call it a concert. I don't mind, review or concert, but we're going out with Columbia Artist Management next October for a tour of the United States.
But in
very exciting.
You have to do everything. But
Yes.
we want you to do everything for us today.
Well,
so would you get ready?
Yes.
We might incidentally say, Jim, that the versatility of today's dancer that they're going to demonstrate is also mirrored in that of the musician for the theater of dance. Our own Jess Meeker here will not only be playing traditional music, but also modern music and jazz, and improvising where necessary. But before dancing begins or music begins, the dancer must have a body. I'm going to ask Pam if she would come out and give us an idea. This is not a dance, this is pre-dance, of how the body is conditioned with respect to strength and agility and control.
And this hasn't changed from yesterday to today.
No, that's right. The back must bend and be flexible. The feet and ankles must move easily. The spine must be straight. The limbs must be separated without difficulty. The torso must bend. Also, if the legs have to be stretched, to prepare for leg extensions, not just high kicks. And balance combined with stretching in unusual positions. And here now is a final stretch, which I'm sure every housewife does every morning. If she doesn't, she should.
I will say that that's
Thanks,
introduced
Pam.
in as many suburbs as possible.
Good. The ballet has, as you know, its own vocabulary built up over hundreds of years, and Chellie and Mike and I have worked out a little study that's not really a dance, but it incorporates what we might call the vocabulary of the classical dance, because it has the balances in it, the leaps, the turns, the quick leg beats, all kinds of things, and it's kind of a potpourri of the language of the classical ballet. Here it is now. The man does the brisk footwork, the allegro dancing, and in this study right now, the girl does the slow adagio with the sustained extension of the legs and the control of the body. Now they're going to change. And the female dancer does the quick movements, and the male the slow, sustained, highly controlled muscular balances, always in elegant ballet style. And then they will dance the end of the study in unison with the fast footwork of the traditional dance. It's almost like a dance, isn't it?
It may be an exercise, but
Yes.
it's an exercise in choreography as well.
But to reach that, there had to be a thing called history. And as you and I know, the ballet started in the royal and the ducal courts of Europe about the time Columbus set out for America. And we wouldn't recognize it as ballet today because the steps were those of the court dances of the time, the pavane, the galliard, the gis.
And the dancers
so
were the nobility.
And the dancers were, the non-professionals,
Yes.
were the kings and queens themselves. So we thought it would be interesting to maybe make a capsule of history and take one of the old pavanes, which is based on the court steps of advancing, retreating, doing a slow turn, and many, many courtly bows. So we've done it in 3 different versions. First, as it might have been done at the time of Catherine de' Medici or a little later, and as a court dance, Chellie will hold her arms out as if she had a big bell skirt on, but she doesn't. Then we will repeat it, keeping exactly the same floor pattern, the dances and retreats, but introducing the beginning techniques of ballet. This would be about 1700.
Now, would this be when
Yeah.
the nobles became onlookers?
Onlookers, you're right, and the professionals came into the theater. Actually, the year was 1680. Then we want to bring it up to 1900 with the advanced techniques that another 100 years or more made. So here's the pavane in 3 different versions, first starting off with the simple steps of the court dance. Now we move to a later century in the beginning of recognizable ballet. Very simple, though. And now we move up another 100 years when the ballerina goes on to point. And the elegance of the court, as you can see, remains in that last final bow, which in ballet we call a grande reverence. It's left over from the days of the court. And that's still that classical style is used. For example, in opera ballets, which can range from all kinds of techniques required, in the opera La Gioconda, the music calls for classical dancing. And here's just a fragment of the choreography in what we would call supported adagio for the ballerina and the danseur in classical style from the opera La Gioconda. again, we seem to still have the cavalier and the princess, don't we, in the relationship.
The elegance is consistent.
And the support of the man for the woman. But of course, you know, modern dance, American modern dance, naturally brings into play the male and the female, and Pam and Tony, who specialize in modern, although they both know ballet, but their accent is on modern, can show us how different that same thing would be, the element of the male supporting the female, in a study in modern dance form. Here they are. That's quite a contrast, isn't it? But the technique of dance is there, only the style really is different.
But the control is there, Walter. And I'm glad you made the point about the modern dancer and his background in ballet.
Yes, they need both. But,
here's a ballet dancer with shoes that one doesn't associate with.
Chellie, you're taking off your point shoes. What are you up to?
I'm about to slip into a pair of red high-heeled Spanish shoes.
What's the reason?
Well, this year I was called upon for the first time to do a Spanish dance in the opera La Traviata. And I took over for a real Spanish dancer, Rosario Galan from Sevilla. And I was very afraid at first that I wouldn't have the right style. But as it turned out, it was all right. It's a sort of it has to be kind of pseudo-Spanish, because the La Traviata music was written by Verdi. We must remember that.
So there's an Italian touch there, yes.
As a
But still, the shoes won't do it alone.
That's true.
How did you prepare?
Well, I watched Rosario.
Uh-huh.
I watched her a lot. I didn't have much time for rehearsal, but I enjoyed her performances so much that something carried through.
Well, now that you're off point, do you suppose you could give us an example of what they call tacconeo, just to throw in a term, which are heel beats?
I will do my best.
Okay, from La Traviata.
Courtesies to Mr. Verdi.
With Mr. Verdi, yes. Muy Español. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It doesn't look as if Rochelle had to come to a sudden decision. I think basically the skill of the dancer is there.
Right.
You know, Mike, I heard, in fact, this was said a few months ago on a camera tray by a wonderful tap dancer, that the tap dancer, to keep going, must put in a little ballet, even into tap.
Oh, yes, I think so.
Now,
I wish I could put a little tap in my ballet.
And I was just going to say, you are the reverse now. I know that in working up to-go dancing, that you've gone way beyond ballet.
Yes, I have, but I'll always have that basic ballet technique. I think it's there. You can't throw it out. But I've tried to extend my horizon a great deal. I've even studied singing quite a bit, and I've done some musicals in summer stock. And I remember, much to my dismay, the opening night I was petrified, and I knew all my lines. I knew the 3 songs, and I had a soft shoe dance put in specially by the choreographer, and I forgot it. Improvised the whole thing.
I think you were just saving your feet, you know.
Well, but how early did you become acquainted with the dance other than
Well,
ballet?
in South Africa, where I was born, we had a teacher who made us learn everything. We learned Spanish dancing with castanets and Irish jig and Scottish dancing, Greek dancing.
We won't do that now. How about a bacchanal? Did you learn how to do a bacchanal?
No, I learned that with Mr. Andrew.
You did?
Yes.
When Thomas Andrew taught you? Okay.
Yes, not Mr. McAndrew, Mr. Andrew.
Show us the bacchanal with Chellie, would you?
All right, I'll try.
Okay. This one again shows the versatility of today's dancer. I don't know, the bacchanal is for home family, but this is kind of a marvelous rhythmic writhing, as choreographed, I think, by Zachary Soloff for a former production of the Met's Samson and Delilah, the bacchanal. That's rather heady
We don't
stuff, isn't
associate it with Petipa.
No, we don't. But another example of contrast, that was within the framework of opera, is the dancing of young boys and girls in terms of modern dance. We saw Pam and Tony earlier. Here they are in a romantic, not quite so lascivious, but a romantic episode from one of Norman Walker's pieces. It's such a gentle ending, but today's dancer, of course, must end with a jazz exit. But you know, Jim, jazz or not, we always come back to the classical ballet because as the years have gone by, it is added with the centuries, with the decades, even with the years and the months, new movements, exciting movements. So Chellie and Mike and I put together some of these movements. There are lifts like you might see in the Bolshoi Ballet. You know they're given to acrobatics. There are new inventions in it. There is romance, and there is that old-time elegance of the court. And I think it's fun because the whole thing is done to one of the loveliest dance airs of all time, the waltz. And here it is with the Blue Danube in the background. Let's see. Today's dancer, remembering the past, but very much of the present. We've only hinted at it, but maybe we did give a few hints of what is expected of the dancer living today.
And thank you for the Terry improvisation.
Thank you.
I think that Mr. Balanchine, Mr. Tudor, and others may look to their laurels. As always, Walter, Terry, thank you very much for joining us on Camera 3, and our thanks also to Rochelle Zide, to Michael Mall, to Pamela Latimer, to Tony Catanzara, and our accompanist, composer-pianist, Jess Meeker. Next week on Camera 3, we invite you to join us for Yiddish stories from two worlds, old and new. It's a program I think you'll enjoy. Until next week, this is Jim McAndrew saying goodbye again for Camera 3.
Today's pianist was Jess Meeker. Camera 3 is presented by WCBS-TV New York in cooperation with the New York State Education Department. Camera 3 was pre-recorded.